been here previously. He was in our wedding back in the Stone Age, and I was in his wedding. And he fell about a month ago and he broke 5 ribs, and he was doing okay, but then he started bleeding profusely, and they gave him 30 pints of blood. And he's been in an induced coma from that point until now, and they had to do some operations that I won't go into. So he is still out even now, so they're trying to save his life, and I'd appreciate it if you'd pray for him. Maybe we should even do it right now. Would somebody like to pray for him? Sean will.
Heavenly Father, we lift Mike up to you. Lord, he's been a servant of yours his entire life, loving you and serving you. Lord, we ask for mercy, compassion, and healing on his body. Father, we just ask that the ribs will heal, Father, that the kidneys will begin to function again, that he'll be able to breathe without a ventilator, and that, Father, you would heal his body, and that the miracle that we're asking for, Lord, would give you glory. In your heavenly name.
Amen. I'm pretty excited about the solar eclipse. To me, and I've said this probably a dozen times in here, to me, the fact that one object of a small size can, line up perfectly with another object 93 million miles away and completely obscure it, that to me shows the design of God. That's the design of the universe. So I'm pretty excited to see it. I know we've had partial eclipse here over the years, but I've never seen one before. So let the clouds be split, and I'm ready to check it out. Okay, as Gene mentioned, the next Sunday, Final Harvest, no regular service. It's going to be all music. We'll say a prayer and be music. And those of you who know me know that that's not my normal modus operandi. And so the only thing is we will take the offering for the ladies. Okay, today's passage is part of what they call the parable of the prodigal son. Now, I want to just mention a couple things here. This is a 4-parter. One part today, one part in 2 weeks, and then we'll continue because the prodigal son and the parable of the unrighteous steward are married together like this. But they're very rarely mentioned in that way. So I'm not going to have anybody read, but I will read this as we go. I've entitled it the Profligate because I'm sick of the word prodigal. It's the same thing. It's a synonym. It means to act recklessly extravagant or wasteful in the use of resources. As a noun, it's licentious, which means licensed to do whatever you want, or a dissolute person. And I can tell you that I was a prodigal son myself. So I understand this. I smoked dope every day before school in high school, every day. Smoked, went to school. And after I got out of school, which I barely got out of school, in those days they had the dummy diploma and the Regents diploma. I got out with the dummy diploma. They don't even have that anymore. You have to have the Regents diploma. So I just barely got out with 16 credits, and so I went to work for what was then Mobile Chemical, which is now, what is it now? Pactiv. It was midnight to 8. I made $3.29 an hour, which was the highest wage, the highest factory wage in Ontario County at the time. $3.29. That was with the shift differential. And that didn't work out too well. I had my own apartment at Rayburn's Apartments over in Bloomfield, and I think it was $175 a month for the apartment. I lived with Rick Nicholson, who most of you know, and I just was in a really bad place. And Thanksgiving that year, I took a hit of acid, and I really despaired of my life that November. And there's a picture of me somewhere around my house with me with hair down to here. And I weighed about 135 pounds. There was just nothing to me. I was in a bad way spiritually. I was in a bad way mentally, and physically in a bad way. And so my father came to me and he said, why don't you move back home, cut your hair, and come to work for me in the real estate business, and I'll get you going in that. So I cut my hair, I moved back home, and I got into the real estate business, and I did very, very well. I was 19 years old. I bought a house on Honeyoy Lake on the west side, and I bought a 2-year-old sedan DeVille, leather seats, everything. I had all kinds of money. I was living at home. I was making more money selling real estate than my high school teachers were making 2 years earlier. And my brother had a 1962 Corvette. And so we pretended that we each had both cars. So we'd have a date. He'd pick her up in his Corvette, then the next time he'd pick her up in my Cadillac, and I'd do the opposite. You know, girls on both arms. All kinds of money for alcohol and drugs. And I lived like that for 2 years. And basically, I never had a drink of alcohol until I was 18 years old. But at the time it was legal for me to drink, I started to drink and continue smoking the drugs and taking LSD and those things during that time. And unlike the story of the prodigal's father, my father thought it was great because he was living vicariously through his sons. You know, he was too old to do that himself, and he encouraged it. And so there came a point where that just wasn't doing it. And so my mother was telling me about Jesus, and eventually I came to Bible studies, I examined the scriptures, and eventually, by the time I was 20, I accepted Jesus and became a Christian. And I stopped smoking, and I stopped smoking dope, much to the surprise of everybody around me. I stopped drinking and went to Bible school, which nobody could figure. You know, what's this guy doing? Is this the same guy that we know? So it was really, it was a good testimony. But I lived as the prodigal, so I know what I'm talking about here, okay? I'm just telling you that. So, and I want to say that the things that I have learned since then are things that I learned because of, you know, experience. I'm not just going to tell you what you might want to do, but I'm going to tell you from what I've seen in life. So, that's what the word means. Now, this is a true story. It's not a parable. It's always called the parable of the prodigal son, but a parable is a story that is just used to illustrate something. But if you look further down the line in the story, you see that when the prodigal comes to his senses, he comes and he says, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you." So we see that this is a real story of a real father with two sons, one of whom went off and did the wrong thing, the other stayed and did the so-called right thing. Although when we look at the story, we'll see that he didn't do the right thing either. And we really have to ask ourselves if the father did the right thing. It says in Psalm 127, "Sons are indeed a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the sons of one's youth. Happy is the man who has a quiver full of them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate." Now, people will sometimes say, "How many kids do you have?" And I'll say, 7. And they'll say, "How many boys and how many girls?" And I'll say, "They're all girls except 5. And that always gets a laugh. "Wow, you really have 7 kids?" Family is the most important thing. You know, sometimes families don't get along. That's not true in my family. We didn't have any argument over the estates in my family. Okay, you want this, you take it. Oh, you want that, you take it. Now, we didn't have any problem dividing things up among the three of us because we knew that family was the most important thing. But over the course of my life, I've seen it's caused rifts in families that are just unbelievable. The selfishness of some people and the other, people just have to acquiesce and say, okay, I'm just not going to fight it. Or they do fight about it and there's lawsuits going on. Well, this is a story about an inheritance. Now, I just want to point out, for no extra charge, when it says that a quiver full is for a warrior, and you wouldn't go to war with just 2 arrows, I don't think. You might go hunting. Don can go hunting with 1 arrow, and he doesn't worry about taking that second shot because he always gets the first shot in. But the idea is that you have a protection in your family. And if Jesus was telling this story today, he would use the example of the large capacity magazine. There's something good about having your family around you. And this story of the prodigal son is a story of a problem in a family. One son does not do the right thing. The younger says, "Give me the share of the property that will belong to me." What's he asking for? He's asking for his inheritance early. And there were specific laws concerning inheritance in ancient Judaism, and we know what those laws were because we have the Old Testament to tell us. And what it is that the firstborn son gets 2 shares. So if there are 12 children, like the 12 sons of Israel, the estate would be divided in 13 shares. Son number 1 gets 2 shares, and every other child gets 1 share. And I just to mention, if you look at the Old Testament, the question comes up: well, what if the guy only has daughters? And they go to Moses, and Moses goes to God, and God says, yeah, the daughters get their share. Sometimes God in the Old Testament gets a rough name because they say, well, it's a patriarchal society and women weren't taken care of. Well, when it came down, push come to shove, the girls did get the same share as the sons. So we know that the boy who stayed got 2/3, and the boy that left got 1/3. We have to wonder if the father was unwise to hand the cash over to him. Now, I can say this because I've already showed you that this is about a real father. I mean, we just tend to look at this passage as God is the father, and the good son is the one that stays with him, and the bad son is the one that goes somewhere else. But here, we have to wonder if this was a wise thing for the father to do. Did the father really know the character of this son? Sometimes estates are squandered. You ever notice a situation where the estate was squandered? My uncle Ricky, God rest his soul, he died at the age of 47, 2 years younger than I am. He was born in 1957, I was born in 1955, and so everybody at school thought he was my brother. And we always tried to tell, no, he's not our brother. He's our uncle. When his mother died in 1970 when he was 16, and his father died in 1976. I guess he was younger than 16 because when his father died, he was 18, and he died in 1976. His mother died in 1970, and he was the son of the second wife, so he was actually my father's half-brother. And that kid had everything. And he was the most ill-mannered child you would ever meet. When my grandfather and his second wife, who we called Aunt Marge, would go to my grandfather's sister's house, it was stated in advance, don't bring Ricky. And so we would go down to my grandfather's house and hang out with him, at a fairly young age, so that they could go visit his sister, but he was not allowed in the house because he was so ill-mannered. And so there came a time when my grandfather died, and he decided that he would leave half to Ricky and half to the other 5. And they already didn't like him because they didn't consider him a brother, and when he died, not a single one of his brothers or sisters came to his funeral. I did his funeral. They did not like him because he was a brat. In fact, his daughter asked me recently, what was my dad like when he was little? I said, do you really want to know? Because if you really want to know, I'll tell you. So I told her, but that's beside the point. My father was the executor, and he kept putting it off, way past the time that it should have been settled. And the reason he did that is because he knew that once Ricky got the money, he would spend every penny. And on the other side, he had his 4 brothers and sisters that were saying, where's our money? Where's our money? Where's our money? He couldn't settle the estate. He couldn't give them their money and not give Rick his money. So eventually, Rick got his money. And he went out and he bought almost new Chevy Super Sport with a 396. This was in the early 70s. Hot rodding around town. He had half a house. I mean, they sold the house and whatever my grandfather had. It was a substantial amount of money at the time. And then he decided, I think I need a Ford F-150. So he went down and he financed the Ford F-150 at Shepherd Brothers. I can tell you all this stuff because he's dead. And he spent all the rest of his money, and he couldn't make the payment on the Ford F-150, so he sold a Chevy Super Sport to pay the payment on the F-150, and after a short period of time, broke. Just like I was, after I had my house in Cadillac, no money left. And to make a long story short, he was at a party one day, and he was drunk, and they said, if you get in that car and drive away, we're calling the cops. Got in the car, drove away, they called the cops. I visited him in a jail down here on Ontario Street. He sired 4 daughters and never paid any child support for any of them. In fact, the 2 middle daughters, I just did a wedding for one of them last summer, and their stepfather, they called their stepfather their father, and they called my uncle their sperm donor. This guy was a prodigal. He spent half of his father's estate drinking, taking drugs, buying cars, selling cars, and he ended up with nothing. And when he died at age 47, well, let me tell you what he said to me just before he died. He said to me, "You're the person that gave me my first cigarette." And I said, "Who's the person that smoked every cigarette since then?" His father smoked, his mother smoked, she died of lung cancer. He died of lung cancer. All of his uncles and aunts smoked. It wasn't that I gave him the first cigarette. I'm not taking that on myself. Yes, I smoked. Yes, I did give him his first cigarette, but I didn't smoke the rest of the cigarettes that he smoked the rest of his life. He only lived to be 47 years old. And when he died, he had a Harley Davidson, and the finance company came and picked it up. And he had a car, and the finance company came and picked it up. And he had a Kenworth, because he was a truck driver. The finance company came and picked it up. And when he died, he had nothing. So this is something from my life, some experience that I have seen. So the younger son says, I want my share of the money, and it says he goes and he squandered it. Of course, the proverb says, an inheritance gained hurriedly at the beginning will not be blessed. When it says squandered, I mean, a lot of times metaphors that are used by Jesus are used both in a positive sense and in a negative sense. In a positive sense, it says God has his winnowing fork, and he takes the grain, and he first he has the animals step over it, and they crush it up, and they take the grain, and the chaff blows away, and the wheat is gathered into the barn. That's a positive thing. And the idea is the Christian, God rubs them a little bit, and throws them around a bit, and all the chaff falls off them, and the good grain remains. So that in that positive way. But here, the same metaphor is used for the way this prodigal son's money went away. Threw it into the wind, and it was gone. Do you know anybody like that? You know, it's never too late to smarten up. Never too late. He lacked restraint. If you look at the definition of the word, when it says he squandered, it means marked by indulgence in things such as drink or promiscuous sex. He went to another place and he squandered the money on harlots. It says in one version. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine took place, and he began to be in need. You know, sometimes people ask me about how to handle money. In fact, I've done classes. Some of you took classes 20 years ago from me on how to budget and stuff like that. And that's something that I learned late in life. Actually, I learned how to budget about 10 years into my ministry here. Because one day, you know, we made pretty good money. I mean, with buying power in those early days, we made more then than we do now. But we had all these bills, and I said to Sean one day, I said, we make decent money. Why don't we have any money? And we sat down and we looked at it. Well, you know, we've got this. We thought it would be a good idea to have overdraft protection. In case we accidentally spend more, you know, 1 week, we have this overdraft, we don't have to pay the fine. So we had overdraft protection, and we had a Marine Midland credit card, and we had a Discover credit card, and we had a car payment. Excuse me, I'm stepping on my lace here. And we had all of these payments. And we realized we're just paying the banker. We were squandering our money on bankers. So we looked at, this thing is really getting to annoy me. Let me try it up here. You know, there's a lot of ways to squander money. There's a scripture in Proverbs that says, it's the little foxes that destroy the vines. And what that means is, it's the little expenses that add up. So it's like, how many dollars are spent, just for example, on Dunkin' Donuts if you go and buy one coffee a morning for a year? It can be anything. You know, any little expense. I'm just using that as an example because that was one of mine. Okay, I think it's like over $3 for a large coffee now, isn't it? 4. Okay, so if I do that every day, that's $20 times 52. What's that? So that's $1,000. I think it's $1,040 if I'm not mistaken. In 1 year, in 10 years, in 20 years. Those little things. Cigarettes. Holy cow, $10 a piece if you smoke a pack a day. I can remember pulling into the gas station one day, and there's a girl there with a rotten old rusty car with a cigarette hanging out of her mouth, and she goes, nice car. And I said, yeah, I drive this instead of smoking. She didn't appreciate it. But it's the truth. We have to learn to budget. We have to learn to not squander. You know, what about an emergency? This is the one thing that people never seem to plan for when they budget, is an emergency. I know that sometime this year my car is going to need work at the mechanics, and I also know it's going to cost $800.
My didn't start this
Oh, great. We have money for that because we're prepared for it. But sometimes people don't prepare for the emergency. Here this guy goes out, he's living the high life, he's got all these girlfriends, he's drinking his wine, and he's doing whatever he's doing and spending money, and everybody thinks he's good time Charlie, and then all of a sudden, he's out of money, and a famine takes place. I think the Mormons have it right when they say you should have some food stocked up. I think that's wise. I think that's forward thinking. We do. I don't know how long it will last because we're pretty gluttonous people, but we do have food in the cupboard. We have food in the freezer. We can run the generator if the power goes out. We can keep the freezer going. And it says divide your portion to 7 or even to 8. My friends, speak to your representatives. It is foolhardy to turn everything to electric. It's foolhardy. All they have to do is hit Gannett and hit Niagara Falls, and they put out the power for all of Western New York. You can't. We don't even have the infrastructure. We should have other ways. We should have our coal. We should have our wood. Now, the only thing we have for heat is we have propane, but if the power goes out, the furnace won't run. Well, we do have a generator, so we can run it for a while, but, you know, I got 30 gallons of gas available to run the generator, but that's only going to run it for a week. Of course they do. They want to ban everything except electric. Divide a portion to 7. Don't have all of your money in the stock market. Don't have all of your money in gold. Don't have all your money in this or that. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's just for you guys, because I know you have eggs and you have baskets. You don't know what misfortune will occur. You have to plan for misfortune. You know you're going to need to take care of certain things. You know you're going to need a roof in 15 years. You know you're going to need all of these different things, and you have to plan for it in advance. This guy isn't doing that. He's just spending. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Well, how does that happen? Now, I have to say, if my father hadn't left me an inheritance, I don't think I could have been here. His problem was he could make money. He had the Midas touch. He could make money. In fact, he offered me cheap Charlies. He said, "Would you like to? I'll give you this restaurant." He was sick. He was dying. He said, "I'll give it to you." He said, this was in 1981. He said, "I'm taking $1,800 a week is my take out of this restaurant." In 1980, that was a lot of money. And I said, "Dad, I can't be selling liquor to people. I'm called to be a pastor." So he went to my brother. He offered it to him, and he said, "I can't be working 7 days a week, 15 hours a day for the rest of my life." And so he sold it. He knew how to earn money. He did not know how to keep money. When he died, he had $5,000, but he had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of real estate, but it was mortgaged. And in the end, we got enough money to pay off our house in Hopewell and fix our house in Hopewell, and we got a car out of the deal. And we used the money in that house, and now everything that we fixed, Stacy's got to fix again. because it's all fallen into disrepair over the last 40 years. But he left me an inheritance, and I'm going to leave my kids an inheritance unless they get Profligate. So far, everybody's still in the will. We had a family meeting a little while ago and told everybody what's what. Everybody's getting the same thing, and Caleb's in charge of it. And if he can't do it, Daisy's going to do it. And I got a cemetery plot over there waiting for me. And tell him not to burn my body. I want to go whole. He won't. Good. I'll be able to, unless something really severe happens in the earth, I'll be able to leave an inheritance to my kids. And if they are good and save some money, you always have to save some money. It's like the Village Missions guy. I've told you about him before. Terry Catlin told me about this guy. Village Missions is a Baptist, very we alone are right type of theology. And what they do is they find these little churches in little villages that are closed. And they say to the church, or whoever's left of the church, you provide the housing, which they usually had a parsonage, and we'll provide a small salary. And I think that guy that you were going to church over in Gorham, I think that was a Village Missions deal. And they pay him very, very little. Do they pay him pretty good? Okay. So Terry was telling me about this guy that did that his whole life, very, very little. And when he retired, he bought a house for cash. And Terry said to him, "How did you do that?" And he said, "It's simple. Spend less than you earn." Simple. He saved that little bit, no matter what it was. That's the only way. You have to plan ahead. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Are there any comments? Yes. We need a microphone over here for Crystal. She sees that hand.
So you're probably not surprised that I'm always interested in money, considering what I do for the
You're
fire
interested in
department.
money, considering what you do?
For the fire department.
Okay, I thought you meant hoarding.
No.
I'm just teasing you.
Well, yeah, maybe. But why is it people think you're nuts if you only pay for what you have money for? In this society, I would say in general, I shouldn't generalize, but I am, they think you're crazy if you only buy, that means everything, you only buy what you can afford.
It makes sense, but it's, I want my inheritance now. I figured out, just for giggles, I have that Mustang convertible. I bought that convertible in 2002. It was 1 year old. It had 13,000 miles on it. It was $26,000 new. After 1 year, I purchased it, including tax, for $13,000. The first person that owned it for 1 year paid for half of it. And I figured out that I have paid under $400 a year to drive that car. Of course, I had to keep it up and all that. It's not counting that. I did a little thing on Sean's car that doesn't work anymore, and I discovered that we paid so far $32 a month to own that car. I've never owned a new car. No, I didn't. The van had 9,000 miles on it. Yep. And it had a dent in the back that eventually the plastic came off and it rusted through. It was a rental, and it was used 9,000 miles. But I did finance it. It's the only car I ever financed. I paid for it in 4 years, and we had to have it because we had 5 kids and 2 more on the way. We didn't know that at the time, but they were coming. That was when we first came here 34 years ago. Anyone else?
So one of the things that I've learned over my life is, by the way, I don't remember us receiving education on finances when we were young. I mean, really, the education system should be educating us on how money works. And so you learn it the hard way. But one of my beliefs with finances is like the proverb said, you divide it up, and the government's going to take 20%.
20?
At least. The government's going to take 20-25%.
You better start thinking about 35% when you
Well,
figure the sales tax and all the other things.
So you divide your money up, and my thing with my kids and people that I talk to is you have to learn to live on half of what you make. You have to learn to live on half of what you make, and if you can live on half of what you make, you will be able to save, you will be able to tithe, you will be able to help others, and then you will have your expenses. And money is a two-way street. Every bit of money that goes out is either being spent or it's being invested. And you have to decide how much of your money are you going to spend, because everything I give to the government is spent, and everything that I tithe is an investment. My cars are an expense. Cars are not an investment. They are an expense. Now, I love going to auctions. And I tell Gene all the time it's a hobby that pays for itself, because I try to buy stuff that I can sell for more than I buy it for. Not always successful.
I was going to say, tell me another story.
Yeah. But the only reason I bring that up is yesterday I was at an auction. It was over in Auburn. And one of the helpers there was a young girl. I will tell you, she was not the type of person that I would normally talk to, because she looked like, she had the dyed hair and the piercings and, it's like, but she came up to me and she said, I had on my cowboy. I like your hat. I said, well, thank you. And she said, so what are you here for? And I said, well, it's an estate auction. I like to buy and sell stuff. And she said, so how much do you spend when you go to an auction? She just started asking these questions. And I said, look, and I told her the same thing. There are ways you do your money, you spend or you invest. And she says, well, I don't have any money to invest at all. And I said, everybody has money to invest, but most of us, we spend more than we make anyway. And so you got to be careful about that. And then she started talking to me, and I started talking to her about her future. And I said, God's design is that he will provide what you need, and you need to earn for what you want. I said, the problem is most of us turn our wants into needs very quickly. And then we spend more than we have because we think we're buying what we need when we're buying something.
Well, that goes to Crystal's question.
Right. So I told her, I said, here's the thing you got to think about every time you get ready to buy something. I've lived this long without it. Do I need it? And if you can put off the purchase of that for a couple of days thinking about it, you may find out you don't need to spend that money. But it's interesting that we started talking about money, but it turned into a lifestyle thing. Now, I failed in witnessing to her fully, but I did tell her that God's design is that he will provide. And she thanked me, and then she had to get back to work.
Oh, she was working at the auction.
She was working at the time. But, it's to me, I think that most people will listen to you if you can talk to them about things like finances, and they don't want to listen to you unless they're interested in talking about God and Jesus. But if you can start talking to them about the things that they will be interested in, finances, you can then evolve that into your discussion of what God does for you and what Jesus has done for you.
My father was foolish in many ways, but in some ways he was very wise. And one of the things that he told me, he said, you can have whatever you want as long as you're willing to wait. And a lot of people aren't willing to wait. And, we just had something come up at our house. We just bought an antique slide glass lamp, a big one, for the dining room. I've been looking for one for years. Literally 20 years I've been looking for one. And one popped up for $300. It was less money than buying a new piece of junk. And I waited for it. I didn't go out and buy the $1,000 new one, which is what it would have cost. But you have to be willing to wait. Anyone else before we take communion and get out of here? I don't want to make light of communion, though. Sorry. It's an important thing that we're doing. Anybody else? I don't know who was supposed to help me today. Do you know?